People often ask me what the hardest part of being a Vietnamese Special Forces soldier was during the Cambodian campaign. They expect me to talk about firefights, ambushes, or crawling through minefields. They're usually surprised when I tell them the hardest part was staying completely silent. Silence kept us alive. It was late in the rainy season of 1983 when my three-man team received orders for what sounded like a routine mission. Our target was a hidden Khmer Rouge ammunition cache buried deep inside a stretch of jungle near the border. Intelligence believed the depot supplied several nearby units, and destroying it would disrupt their operations for weeks. Our team leader, Hung, unfolded the weather-stained map under the dim glow of a flashlight wrapped in green cloth. Even after years in the jungle, he never rushed through a briefing. Every stream, termite mound, and trail mattered. Besides Hung, there were only two others with me. Locke was our explosive specialist. He barely talked, but his hands were steady enough to wire demolition charges in complete darkness. Whenever he checked his blasting caps, he hummed old Vietnamese folk songs under his breath, so quietly that only someone standing beside him could hear. Then there was Dewey, the youngest among us. He was only 20 years old and carried a small harmonica inside his pack. He often joked that one day he'd play it while sitting on a beach back home instead of listening to insects and gunfire. None of us ever heard him play a single note in Cambodia. I carried my fighting knife, wire cutters, a folded hammock tarp, several packets of dried rice, and an old dented canteen that had survived more missions than I could count. The dents came from years of crawling over rocks, roots, and shattered ground. Somehow, it never leaked. We checked our gear one final time. No unnecessary words. No wasted movement. That was how Special Forces operated. Just as we were preparing to leave, a reconnaissance runner arrived out of breath. Sweat dripped from his face as he whispered something into Hung's ear. Hung's expression changed immediately. "The plans change," he said quietly. The ammunition depot was no longer guarded by the usual squad. A newly arrived security detail had taken over the area, including several female Khmer Rouge soldiers who had established fresh observation posts along our planned approach. The route we'd memorized for days was no longer safe. Walking into it would have been suicide. Hung spread the map back onto the ground. "There won't be a second chance," he whispered. His finger traced a narrow line through an untouched section of dense jungle. "No trails. No landmarks. We make our own way." Nobody argued. Special Forces weren't trained to question sudden changes. We adapted. That was the difference between coming home and disappearing forever beneath the jungle canopy. Before leaving, each of us quietly ate a handful of dried rice. It was hard enough to crack a tooth if you weren't careful. But it filled your stomach without needing a fire. The jungle around us smelled of wet earth and decaying leaves. Somewhere in the darkness, frogs croaked while unseen insects buzzed endlessly. The night itself seemed alive. Hung gave the signal. Without another word, we slipped into the trees, each man disappearing only a few feet behind the next until even our shadows vanished. At that moment, none of us knew that the mission to destroy an ammunition dump would become something entirely different. Before dawn, we would encounter a woman whose story would haunt me far longer than the explosion we had come to create. We left the safe line without a sound. Hung moved first, low and slow, his body almost blending into the wet ground. Locke followed him, carrying the demolition charge wrapped tight against his chest. Dewey came next, and I took the rear. That was our order. Nobody needed to say it. We had practiced it so many times that each man knew where his shadow belonged. The jungle swallowed us in less than a minute. There was no trail now, no footpath, no clean opening between the trees. The route on the map had become useless the moment those new Khmer Rouge guards appeared. From that point on, we trusted only Hung's eyes, our compass, and the quiet signals passed from hand to hand. The ground was soft from old rain. Every time I placed my palm down, mud pushed between my fingers. The smell of wet earth, rotten leaves, and gun oil stayed in my nose. Mosquitoes swarmed around our ears, but none of us slapped at them. A slap in the jungle could sound louder than a rifle shot if the night was still enough. After about an hour, we reached the first obstacle. A line of barbed wire stretched between two black tree trunks. It was not on our map. That told us one thing right away. The enemy had changed more than their guard posts. They had tightened the whole area. Hung raised one fist. We froze. Then he pointed at me and Locke. I eased forward on my stomach, pulling the wire cutters from my pouch. Locke slid up beside me, one hand pressing the wire so it would not shake. I opened the jaws of the cutter one slow inch at a time. Metal against metal could betray us. One cut. Then another. We did not remove the wire. We only opened enough space for a man to crawl through without touching the barbs. Hung went first. Locke passed the charge through. Dewey followed. When it was my turn, my canteen scraped lightly against a root. I stopped breathing. Somewhere ahead, a voice spoke in Khmer. A woman's voice. Then another answered. They were close. Closer than we expected. I pressed myself flat into the mud and waited. My cheek was against the ground. Ants crawled across my neck. I could hear Dewey breathing ahead of me. Slow but uneven. He was young, but he was not careless. Fear visits every man in war. Discipline is what keeps it from speaking out loud. The voices faded after a while. Hung signaled us forward. We crawled for what felt like half the night. At one point, Dewey started trembling. I thought it was fear at first, but when I touched his ankle, his skin was burning hot. Malaria had found him again. He had been fighting it for days and hiding it badly. I leaned close to his ear. You good? He nodded once. That was all. In peacetime, a fever sends a man to bed. In that jungle, it only made him quieter. Near midnight, we reached a shallow stream. The water came up to our knees and moved cold around our legs. We crossed slowly, lifting each foot straight up so the water would not splash. On the far bank, Hung stopped again. He was looking at something through the trees. At first I saw nothing. Then my eyes adjusted. A small hut stood in a patch of darkness, half covered by palm leaves. No light, no smoke, no movement outside. But it should not have been there. Hung lowered himself beside me and unfolded the map just enough to check. His jaw tightened. That hut was not marked. And from inside it, very faintly, came a sound none of us expected to hear. Someone was crying. Hung held up two fingers, then pointed toward the hut. That meant only two of us would move in. He chose me and Locke. Dewey stayed low near the stream bank, still shaking from fever, his rifle held tight across his chest. Hung remained behind him, watching the tree line and the dark gaps between the trunks. In Special Forces work, the man who waits often carries the heavier burden. He has to trust the ones who move forward, and he has to be ready to kill the silence if everything goes wrong. Locke and I crawled toward the hut without raising our knees. The mud sucked at our uniforms. Wet leaves stuck to my sleeves. I could feel my knife pressing against my ribs and the wire cutters tapping softly against my belt. Every small sound felt dangerous. The crying came again. It was not loud. It was the kind of sound a person makes after they have already learned that crying does not bring help. I reached the side wall first. The hut was made from rough poles and palm leaves, tied together in a hurry. It did not look like a guard post. There were no ammunition crates outside, no cooking fire, no stacked weapons, just footprints in the mud and a faint smell of sweat, fear, and old rice. Locke touched my shoulder and pointed down. A thin rope ran across the ground near the entrance, almost hidden under leaves. Not a mine, not a trip flare, Just a crude warning line tied to a small tin can full of pebbles. Simple. Effective. If we had stepped through that doorway, the whole jungle might have heard us. Locke eased his knife under the rope and held it steady while I reached inside and removed the can. One pebble rolled against the metal. I froze. My heartbeat sounded louder than the stream behind us. Nothing moved. We waited. Then I lifted one corner of the palm wall and looked inside. At first I could only make out shapes. Then my eyes adjusted. There were civilians inside. 5, maybe 6 of them, crouched together on the dirt floor. An old man, 2 women, a boy no older than 12, another child lying on his side with both arms wrapped around his stomach. They were not soldiers. They were not carrying weapons. Their wrists were tied with strips of cloth. The crying came from the younger woman. Her face was thin, and her eyes were wide with a kind of fear I had seen too many times in that country. Not fear of dying in a battle. Fear of being taken somewhere and never seen again. For a few seconds, I forgot the ammunition depot. I forgot the charge in Locke's pack. I forgot the map, the mission, and the orders. All I saw were people trapped in a hut while armed men guarded the jungle around them. Locke looked at me. He did not speak, but his eyes asked the same question I was asking myself. Do we cut them loose? If we freed them, they might run into the night and be killed. They might cry out from panic. They might lead the guards straight back to us without meaning to. And if we stayed too long, the depot mission would fail. I signaled Locke to wait. Then I crawled back to Hung. When I told him what we had found, his face hardened, but not from anger, from pain. He looked toward the hut, then toward the direction of the depot. His decision came slowly. We finish the mission first, he whispered. Nobody liked those words, but we all understood them. That was the cruelty of war. Sometimes a man had to walk away from suffering in order to stop something worse from happening. Before we moved out, I slipped one packet of dried rice through a gap in the wall. The younger woman saw my hand. She did not scream, she only stared. Her eyes followed me as I pulled away. I have carried that look with me for more than 40 years. We left the hut behind us and crawled deeper into the jungle. Toward the ammunition depot. Behind us, the crying stopped. And somehow, that silence felt even heavier. We reached the outer edge of the ammunition depot sometime after midnight. There was no sign, no fence line like you would see around a proper base. Nothing that told an ordinary man he was looking at a military target. That was how the Khmer Rouge worked. They hid weapons under palm roofs, inside rice huts, beneath piles of firewood, anywhere the jungle could help them disappear. Hung raised his hand, and we dropped flat. Ahead of us, through a curtain of branches, I saw 3 low structures spread out near a dry creek bed. One had fresh footprints around it. Another had armed guards moving past in slow circles. The third was covered with cut leaves, but the ground near its entrance was too worn to be natural. That was the depot. Locke crawled beside me and studied it for a long moment. He did not need many words. He touched 2 fingers to his chest, then pointed toward the covered hut. He would plant the charge. I would cover him. Hung would watch the patrol route. Dewey, still burning with fever, stayed behind a fallen log with his rifle aimed at the tree line. I remember looking at him and seeing sweat running down his cheeks even though the night air was cool. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Nobody asked if he could continue. In that place, asking was almost cruel. If a man could still crawl, he crawled. We waited through one full patrol cycle, then another. The guards were not careless. That troubled me, many times. A nervous enemy makes mistakes. These people moved like they had been warned. One guard stopped every few steps and listened. Another carried his rifle across his chest instead of slinging it over his shoulder. And near the far side of the depot, I saw a female Khmer Rouge soldier standing almost completely still beneath a tree. She did not smoke. She did not talk. She just watched the darkness. Hung noticed her too. He signaled, "Delay." That changed everything. The original plan was to place the charge, set the timer, and slip away before the patrol returned. But the woman's position covered the exact route Locke needed to use. If he crossed too soon, she might catch the movement. So we waited. Minutes stretched until they felt like hours. Mud soaked through my sleeves. Mosquitoes fed on the back of my neck. My left hand went numb under the weight of my own body. But I did not move it. Special Forces work was not like the stories people told later. Most of it was pain, patience, and the discipline to do nothing when every nerve in your body screamed to act. At last, the woman turned her head toward the creek bed. Hung made a small motion with his hand. "Go." Locke moved first. I followed, keeping several yards behind him, my eyes fixed on the guards. He slid across open ground so slowly that he looked less like a man than a shadow pushed by the wind. When he reached the covered hut, he opened his pack and pulled out the explosives. The bok fa had been wrapped in oiled cloth to keep moisture out. Locke worked without hurry. One charge near the entrance, another deeper against the stacked crates inside. He used his fingertips more than his eyes. Then something went wrong. A guard changed direction. He was not supposed to turn that way. He walked toward the hut, rifle low, head tilted as if he had heard something. I tightened my grip on my knife. Locke was still inside. If the guard reached the doorway, the mission was finished, and so was Locke. I looked back at Hung. His face was half hidden in shadow, but I saw the decision forming there. If he gave the signal, I would have to drop the guard silently before he raised an alarm. But that would bring us closer to a firefight we had no room to win. The guard came closer. 3 steps. 2. Then, from the far side of the depot, Dewey made the smallest sound with a pebble against wood. Not loud. Just enough. The guard stopped and turned. For 1 second, the whole jungle seemed to hold its breath. Locke slipped out of the hut behind him, flat against the ground, with the timer already set. We had our charge in place. Now we had to leave before the night exploded. We started pulling back the moment Locke cleared the hut. The timer was running now. Every second had weight. Hung signaled us toward the creek bed, the same low route we had used coming in. If everything went right, we would be across the water and back under thick cover before the first charge went off. If everything went wrong, the explosion would light up the whole depot while we were still too close to run. Locke moved ahead of me, breathing hard through his nose. I could see the strain in his shoulders. Planting explosives in silence took more out of a man than carrying them for miles. Dewey was farther back, half hidden behind the fallen log, waiting for us to pass. Then I saw her. The female Khmer Rouge soldier had moved without us noticing. She stood between 2 trees, only a few yards to my right, rifle in her hands, not an AK like ours, but close enough to kill just the same. Her face was narrow, her hair tied back under a dark scarf. She looked young, maybe younger than Dewey, but her eyes were old in a way I still cannot explain. For 1 second, neither of us moved. She saw me. I saw her. My knife was already in my hand. That was training. That was survival. In Special Forces work, hesitation could bury your whole team before sunrise. But she did not raise her rifle. Her fingers were on the weapon, but not tight. Her mouth opened slightly, as if she wanted to speak and had forgotten how. Behind me, I knew Locke was still exposed. Hung was too far to help. Dewey was sick and barely holding position. If she shouted, we were finished. I moved first. 2 steps. Fast. Silent. I caught the barrel of her rifle with one hand and pressed the knife close enough that she could feel the cold of it against her throat. She went stiff, but she did not fight. No kick, no elbow, no bite, nothing. Only a whisper. "Don't kill me." Her Vietnamese was broken, but clear enough. That startled me more than if she had pulled the trigger. I dragged her down into the mud and covered her mouth with my hand. Her whole body trembled, not the shaking of someone pretending. Real fear, deep fear. Then the depot exploded. The first blast tore through the jungle like the sky had cracked open. A second later, the ammunition inside began cooking off. Rounds popped and snapped in every direction. Orange fire pushed through the palm roof, and black smoke rolled upward into the trees. Men shouted. Some fired blindly. The female soldier flinched under my hand but still did not struggle. Hung appeared beside me like a shadow. His eyes went from me to the prisoner, then toward the burning depot. For a moment, I thought he would order me to leave her. We had no time, no room, no reason to carry an enemy soldier through a retreat. But before he could speak, she grabbed my sleeve with both hands. "I know where they keep people," she whispered. "The hut, more places, I know." Hung's face changed. "Not much. Just enough." Behind us, Dewey coughed and nearly fell as he tried to stand. Locke grabbed him under one arm. Tracer fire cut through the branches above us. Hung made the decision. "She comes." I pulled the woman to her feet and pushed her ahead of me. She stumbled once, then kept moving. The depot burned behind us, throwing light across the wet leaves and the faces of men who had no time to understand what had just happened. As we ran low through the trees, I kept one hand on the woman's shoulder and one hand on my knife. I did not trust her. Not yet. But I knew one thing. She had chosen not to fire. And in war, sometimes one finger that does not squeeze the trigger changes everything. We did not question her right away. There was no time for that. The depot was still burning behind us, and the jungle had come alive with shouting, gunfire, and the sharp cracking sound of ammunition cooking off in the flames. We moved low and fast, not running upright like men in a movie, but bent forward, slipping between trees, trying not to break branches or leave a clean trail. The woman stumbled often. Each time, I caught her by the arm and pushed her forward. I still did not trust her. None of us did. She was Khmer Rouge. She had stood guard over a weapons cache. She carried a rifle. Those facts did not disappear just because she had chosen not to shoot me. But fear has a truth of its own. And the fear in her was real. After nearly an hour, Hung led us into a thick patch of bamboo where the ground dropped into a shallow hollow. It was not safe, but it was hidden enough for a few minutes. Locke checked the rear. Dewey collapsed against a tree root, breathing through clenched teeth, his fever worse now. I gave him my dented canteen, and he drank only a little before handing it back. Even sick, he saved water for the rest of us. That was Dewey. Hung crouched in front of the woman. "Name," he whispered. She hesitated. "Sray Mom," she said. Her voice was dry and small. Hung asked about the hut by the stream. At first she looked away. Then she began to talk. Her Vietnamese came broken, mixed with Khmer words we only partly understood. But the meaning was clear enough. The civilians in that hut were not prisoners of war. They were villagers. They had been taken because someone accused them of hiding rice from the Khmer Rouge unit. A few handfuls of rice. That was all. She said there were other huts. Other groups. Some were used only for holding people overnight. Some were places where people were taken and did not come back. Nobody spoke after that. The night around us felt colder. Locke sat with his back against the bamboo, one hand still resting on the satchel where the last of his explosives had been. He was a quiet man, but I could see his jaw moving, like he was grinding down words he refused to say. Locke had grown up in a poor farming village near the coast. He knew what rice meant. Rice was not just food. It was survival. It was a mother's hands, a father's field, a child's bowl at the end of the day. Dewey stared at the ground. His harmonica was still in his pack. I remember thinking how strange it was that a boy who dreamed of playing music by the sea had to sit in the mud and listen to a woman talk about people being punished for being hungry. Hung asked her why she served them. Srey Mom swallowed hard. They took my brother first, she said. Then my mother. They said if I worked, maybe they lived. She did not say whether they were still alive. Maybe she did not know. Maybe she knew and could not say it out loud. I wanted to hate her. That would have been easier. War becomes simpler when every enemy face looks the same in your mind. But sitting there in that bamboo hollow, watching her tremble in a uniform too large for her shoulders, I felt something more difficult than hate. I felt the weight of what war does to people before it ever kills them. Then she looked at Hung and whispered the words that changed our retreat. There is another holding place east of here, she said, closer than your base. Hung's eyes narrowed. How many guards? She raised 3 fingers. Then added, maybe more now. Behind us, distant voices moved through the jungle. The enemy was still searching. And now we had a new choice to make. We did not go east right away. Hung made that clear with one look. Our first duty was still to get our team out alive. The depot had been destroyed. The enemy was searching, and Dewey was getting weaker by the minute. A sick man in the jungle does not make noise like a wounded man. He gets quiet, too quiet. That was what scared me. We moved before the voices behind us came any closer. Srey Mom walked between Locke and me. Her hands were not tied. Hung made that decision. He said a tied prisoner slowed everyone down. I kept my knife close anyway. Trust was not something you handed out in that jungle. Trust had to survive a few bullets first. The rain started just before dawn. Not heavy, but steady enough to blur footprints and soak through our uniforms. In another life, I might have welcomed it. Rain could cover tracks. Rain could hide movement. But that morning, every drop felt cold against my skin. And the smell of wet bamboo mixed with smoke from the burning depot behind us. After maybe half a mile, we stopped beneath a leaning tree where the roots formed a shallow pocket in the earth. Dewey crouched there, shaking so badly his rifle barrel tapped against a root. Locke put a hand over the barrel to quiet it. No one scolded him. Srey Mom watched Dewey for a moment, then looked away. I thought she was afraid of him. Later, I understood she was ashamed to look at anyone who was suffering. Hung asked her again about the other holding place. This time, she told us more. She said the Khmer Rouge unit had taken villagers from 3 small settlements. Some were accused of hiding rice. Some were accused of helping Vietnamese soldiers. Some had done nothing except lie in the wrong place when armed men arrived. Then she told us about a woman with 2 children. The woman had kept a small cloth bag of rice under the floor of her hut. Not enough to feed a village. Not enough to supply soldiers. Just enough to keep her children alive for a few days. They found it. Srey Mom said the commander gathered everyone and made them watch. He said hunger made people selfish. He said mercy made soldiers weak. Then he ordered the woman separated from her children. Srey Mom stopped talking there. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. Hung waited. He was hard when he needed to be. But he never forced a broken person to speak faster than their pain allowed. Finally, she whispered. The children cried for her. They kept calling. Nobody moved. Even the jungle seemed to pull back from us. I had seen dead men before. I had seen ambushes, burned villages, bodies beside roads. War had already taken many soft things out of me. But listening to her describe that moment did something different. It did not make me angry in the loud way. It made me hollow. Dewey closed his eyes. Locke stared at the mud. Hung's face did not change, but I saw his hand tighten around the strap of his rifle. Srey Mom said she had stood guard that day. She had not fired a shot. She had not given an order. But she had stood there with a rifle in her hands. And after it was over, she had still been alive. That was the part that haunted her. Maybe that was why she did not shoot me at the depot. Maybe some part of her had already stopped serving them long before she found the courage to lower her rifle. I wanted to ask why she had not run sooner. But I did not. War gives people choices only after it has already stolen half of them. Then a rifle cracked somewhere behind us. Not close. But not far enough. Hung dropped flat and raised one fist. The rest of us froze. A second shot followed. Then shouting. The search party had found our trail. Srey Mom looked at me, her face pale beneath the mud. If they catch me, she whispered, they will not ask questions. I looked at Dewey, barely able to stand. I looked at Locke, still carrying what was left of our gear. Then I looked at Hung. We had heard enough truth to know what kind of enemy was behind us. And now that truth was coming through the trees with rifles. The first shots came from behind us, then from the left. Hung knew right away they were trying to push us toward the creek. That was an old tactic. Let a man think water will hide his trail, then wait for him where the banks grow steep and slow. If we went straight back the way we came, we would be walking into their hands. Hung pointed east. Not toward our base. Toward the holding place Srey Mom had mentioned. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood him. Then he looked at me and tapped 2 fingers against his chest. Then pointed at Dewey. My job was clear. Stay with the sick man. Locke took the front with Srey Mom beside him. Hung moved rear guard. We slipped through the bamboo in a crooked line, changing direction every few dozen yards. Rain dripped from the leaves and ran down the back of my neck. Mud swallowed our boots. The jungle smelled of smoke, wet bark, and fear. Dewey tried to walk on his own. He made it maybe 50 yards before his knees gave out. I caught him under the arms before he hit the ground. I'm fine, he whispered. You're lying, I said. He gave me a weak smile. Then I'm still alive. That was Dewey, even with fever burning through him. He found a way to make a joke small enough not to wake the trees. I slung his arm over my shoulder and pulled him up. Behind us, another rifle cracked. A round cut through leaves above my head. Not close enough to kill, but close enough to remind me that the jungle had teeth. Hung signaled for speed. Speed was the one thing we no longer had. Locke looked back once. His eyes went to Dewey, then to the satchel still hanging from my shoulder. Inside it were our remaining explosives, extra wire, and 2 small charges we had planned to use if the first target had a secondary cache. Weight mattered now. Every pound mattered. I knew what Hung would say before he said it. Drop the bag, he whispered. That satchel was mission equipment. Good equipment, hard to replace. In another situation, losing it would have brought questions from officers who had never crawled through that jungle with a sick boy on their back. But out there, beneath that rain, there was no argument. I took the satchel off and laid it under a fallen branch. For 1 second my hand stayed on it. Special Forces soldiers are trained to protect tools, weapons, and secrets, but no tool was worth Dai's life. I lifted him higher against my shoulder. We go, Hung said. We moved again. The ground climbed. Roots twisted across the slope like traps. Dai's breathing grew rough. Twice he tried to pull away from me, ashamed that he was slowing us down. Twice I held him tighter. Save your strength, I whispered. He said nothing. Then we heard voices ahead. Khmer voices. Locke dropped flat and pulled Srey Mom down with him. Hung came up beside us, his face streaked with mud. Through the trees, we saw the holding place. It was smaller than I expected. 2 huts, one cooking shelter, and a narrow fence made from sharpened bamboo. 3 guards stood outside, maybe more inside. One guard smoked under a palm roof. Another sat with a rifle across his knees. The third paced slowly near the fence. Behind the bamboo slats, I saw shapes. People. Alive. Srey Mom's voice shook when she whispered, "That is the place." Hung looked at the prisoners. Then at Dewey. Then at the jungle behind us, where the search party was still closing in. His face carried the kind of burden no commander should ever have to carry. If we attacked, we might save those villagers but lose our way out. If we slipped past, we might save ourselves and leave them to whatever morning would bring. Dewey must have understood, because he gripped my sleeve. "Don't leave them," he whispered. I looked down at him. His lips were pale, his body was shaking, he could barely stand. And still, he was asking us to risk everything for strangers. That is the part of war people forget. Courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is a fevered kid in the rain, telling grown men what they already know is right. Hung closed his eyes for half a breath. Then he opened them and gave the signal. Silent approach. No gunfire unless there was no other choice. We were not going back yet. We reached our lines after sunrise, but none of us looked like men returning from a successful mission. The ammunition depot was gone. That part of the order had been completed. We had also brought back Srey Mom alive, along with 4 villagers from the small holding place east of the creek. 2 others had been too weak to walk, so Hung marked the location and sent a rescue team back with medics and stretchers. On paper, it would have sounded clean. In real life, nothing about it was clean. Dewey was half conscious by the time we crossed into friendly ground. His fever had taken the fight out of his legs, but not out of his heart. When the medics tried to lay him down, he grabbed my sleeve and asked whether the villagers had made it. I told him yes. Only then did he let go. Locke sat on an empty ammunition crate and stared at his hands. They were still steady, the same hands that had wired the charges in the dark, but I could tell something inside him had shifted. Locke was not afraid of explosions. He was not afraid of crawling under gunfire. But the story about the woman and the hidden rice had gone deeper than any piece of shrapnel. Hung reported to the officers first. I watched him from outside the command shelter. He stood straight, mud covering his uniform from chest to boots, and spoke in that calm voice of his. No drama, no boasting, just facts. Depot destroyed, enemy patrol active, 1 prisoner captured, civilians located, possible additional holding sites based on prisoner statement. That was how war got written down. Short lines. Cold words. But the truth underneath those words was heavy. Later that day, Srey Mom was questioned by intelligence officers with an interpreter present. I was not supposed to listen, but I was nearby, cleaning my knife and pretending not to hear. She gave names, trail markers, guard routines, and descriptions of places hidden beneath palm roofs and beside dry streambeds. Some of what she said helped our units find more civilians. Some of it led to empty huts and old ashes. Some of it, I think, she carried simply because she needed another human being to know. I remember one officer asking her why she had not fired at me. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she answered, because I was tired of being alive that way. No one in the shelter spoke after that. That sentence stayed with me. When I was young, I thought war divided people neatly. Our side, their side, good men, bad men, the living, the dead. Cambodia taught me that war was uglier than that. It could turn frightened children into guards, hungry villagers into prisoners, and decent men into people who had to walk away from crying huts because the mission still had to be finished. I do not say that to excuse evil. Some things cannot be excused. The Khmer Rouge committed crimes so cold that even now, decades later, I still struggle to put them into words. But I learned that understanding how a person was broken is not the same as forgiving what they helped guard. Srey Mom was moved away after 3 days. I never saw her again. I do not know whether she rebuilt a life or carried that jungle inside her until the end. As for us, we kept fighting. That is what soldiers do. Dewey survived the fever. Locke stopped humming for a long time. Hung never mentioned the mission unless an officer asked. And me? I kept my dented canteen. The one Dewey drank from that morning. Every time I touch it, I remember the depot burning behind us, the villagers stepping into the rain, and a young woman in an enemy uniform whispering truths no human being should have to carry alone. More than 40 years have passed, but some nights still carry the smell of that jungle. Wet earth, burned powder, rotten leaves, smoke caught in the rain. I am an old man now. My hands are slower. My knees remind me of every mile I crawled, climbed, and ran through Cambodia. People see gray hair and think the war must have faded with time. It does not fade. It changes shape. It becomes quieter. It sits in ordinary things. For me, it sits in a dented canteen. I keep it wrapped in an old piece of cloth in a wooden box. The paint is mostly gone. One side is crushed inward where it hit a rock during a night movement. The cap does not seal right anymore. Nobody would pay money for it. To anyone else, it is just an old piece of army gear. To me, it holds voices. Dai's voice, weak with fever, asking if the villagers made it. Locke's quiet breathing as he wired explosives in the dark. Hung's low command when he chose people over the safer road home. And sometimes, whether I want to hear it or not, Srey Mom's broken whisper telling us what the Khmer Rouge had done. After the war, life did not become simple right away. Dewey came home thin, but alive. For a while, malaria kept returning like an unwanted visitor. He eventually became a schoolteacher near the coast. Years later, he told me he finally played that little harmonica for his students. Not well, he said, but loud enough to make them laugh. That sounded like victory to me. Locke returned to his village and worked repairing fishing boats. He never liked crowds. He never liked fireworks. On holidays, when children set off firecrackers, he would step inside and shut the door. But his hands stayed steady. He built things after spending his youth learning how to destroy them. I always respected him for that. Hung remained in the army longer than any of us. He was not a man who talked about memories. The last time I saw him, he only asked whether I still had the canteen. When I said yes, he nodded like that answered more than one question. As for Srey Mom, I never learned what became of her. Some men said people like her did not deserve peace. Maybe they were right to feel that way. I do not argue with anyone who suffered under the Khmer Rouge. Pain has its own language, and outsiders should be careful when judging it. But I remember her as I saw her that night, young, soaked in rain, shaking in an enemy uniform, carrying stories no human being should have been forced to carry. I do not call her innocent. I do not call her forgiven. I only say war had already damaged her long before we found her. That is the truth I carried home. When young people ask me what our mission was, I tell them we were sent to destroy an ammunition depot. That is the simple answer. That is the answer that fits into a military report. But the real mission became something else. It became a sick soldier refusing to leave strangers behind. It became a quiet explosives man dropping his fear into the mud and moving forward anyway. It became a commander choosing the harder road because the easy one would have cost him his soul. And it became one enemy soldier lowering her rifle, then speaking the truth about crimes done in the name of power, hunger, and fear. I still keep the canteen because it reminds me that survival is not the same as being untouched. War follows men home. So does brotherhood. And on the nights when rain taps against my roof, I sometimes take that old canteen from the box and hold it in both hands. It is empty now. But to me, it still carries the weight of that morning.